We have to get out of the mentality of thinking that America makes all the choices, that we have all the power, that we have all the agency, that we're the big one who makes all the choices. We're not the big one anymore. They're bigger than us in most of the important ways. We're big. We're still big, but they're bigger than us in most important ways.
I have never quite been able to figure out why the United States, the West, whatever, is like so bent on this sort of path of escalation and keeping China down, or I'm not even quite sure what exactly it is we think we're trying to do with our export controls.
We had this rupture in our relations with China under Mao that we repaired. We patched it up, and we'll patch it up again someday. We'll be friends with China again someday, but unilateral dropping of deterrence, unilateral weakening of all our deterrence methods is not the way to patch that up more quickly.
Hello, and welcome back to the Cognitive Revolution. Today, I'm beginning what I expect will be an ongoing series of episodes exploring one of the most consequential and fraught issues of our time, U.S. China relations. My guide today is economist Noah Smith, author of the No Opinion blog and co-host of the Econ 102 podcast, also on the Turpentine Network. There's an old joke about a visitor to China. After a week, they think they know something about China. And after a month, they believe they know a lot about China. But after a year, they realize they know nothing about China. I mention this because I approach this topic with genuine humility, considering the role that fear of China and Chinese AI plays in American AI discourse today, and considering the many foreign policy mistakes the U.S. government has made in recent decades. I feel this topic is too important to ignore and also too complicated to uncritically accept the Washington consensus. But to be very clear, and to channel the language of a historical Red Scare, I do not now, nor do I ever expect to have, all of the answers. With that in mind, I consider this a sort of warm-up episode, which I hope will serve as useful context for a number of additional conversations going forward. And I think that Noah is really a good person to provide such perspective, as he's a super well-read, well-traveled, including having lived in Asia for a few years, and extremely open-minded thinker who's willing to challenge prevailing orthodoxies. I started off by asking Noah to sketch out the historical arc of U.S. China relations, and I appreciated how his analysis balanced short-term realism, noting that China, and arguably Xi Jinping specifically, was first to defect from a more positive relationship, with longer-term perspective, observing not only that the U.S. and China have been allies in the past, but that there are no major fundamental reasons that the two countries couldn't conceivably repair their relationship in the future. In fact, contrary to anyone who would frame the U.S.-China rivalry as some sort of inevitable or eternal clash of civilizations, Noah also notes that despite our obviously different histories and political systems, there are a number of surprising cultural similarities shared between our two peoples. Along the way, we also get Noah's takes on some of the most important AI-related questions being debated today. What are the U.S. export controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment and chips themselves ultimately meant to accomplish? How much are they changing China's calculus when it comes to potentially acting on Taiwan? And what will their practical effects be? Can we expect to deny China the ability to militarize AI technology or meaningfully slow their progress toward AGI? Or will we perhaps simply deny the Chinese public the benefit of AI productivity improvements and economic growth? I appreciate that Noah answered as many of these questions as he felt confident answering, and also gave his standard fallback no opinion answer to a few as well. This is, of course, far from the final word on these topics, and we should all be striving to learn and understand both the other side and the overall situation better as we go forward through time. As always, if you're finding value in the show, we'd appreciate it if you'd share it with friends, write a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or leave us a comment on YouTube. Your feedback, including suggestions for guests that can provide a unique perspective on the U.S.-China question, is always welcome too, either via our website, cognitiverevolution.ai, or by DMing me on your favorite social network. Now, I hope you enjoy this foundation-laying conversation on U.S.-China relations with economist and writer Noah Smith.
What's up, dude?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Great. Great to be with you again.
Good to see you.
Here's kind of what I thought I would do, just quick preface for you, and then we can jump into it. Basically, I have never quite been able to figure out why the United States, the West, whatever, is like so bent on this sort of path of escalation and keeping China down, or I'm not even quite sure what exactly it is we think we're trying to do with our export controls. So I've been like voicing sort of doubt about this in various places. And somebody just recently tagged me online and said that I and Robert Wright are the only two China doves in the world, which is not literally true, but like, I feel like I'm way out of my depth here in terms of analyzing China. But I also feel like I haven't really been able to get a good sort of from the ground up, start with explain like I'm five, most basic, like, why are we here? And are there any alternatives that we have? What I would love to hear is sort of the steelman mainstream case for why we need to do what we're currently doing. And the reason I care, in addition to the fact that like, I would like the Chinese public to have, economic growth, just like I would like us to have economic growth, is it feels to me like a pattern of escalation, weaponization, whatever is like not good for the overall big picture AI safety picture that I do also worry about.
Well, okay, a couple questions before I do that. Number one, are we talking mostly about AI, or are we talking just sort of a general geopolitical thing? Like, how focused are you asking about here?
Well, I'm very focused on AI, but I do think like the broader context is important,
Because, like, for example, I don't see DeepSeek as a threat to America at all. Like, it doesn't seem like a threatening thing to me. I don't understand why people are like, China just defeated America, blah blah blah. Like, I don't get that. And yet, at the same time, I think the threat of like a war over Taiwan is big and real. So I think that a lot of people think of U.S. China competition as some sort of like vibe, like like who's winning. Some people in China released an LLM that's pretty good, and cheap. Wow, they're winning. And like, I've never seen things that way. In fact, I'm gonna write that later today. I'm actually gonna write a post on DeepSeek against my better judgment. But basically, I don't understand why that LLM is a threat to us. And so I don't think that our policy should be focused around trying to stop China from developing things like DeepSeek. And so that's so in other words, I don't have a good explanation for you of why, we should worry about that and be freaked out and like, try to kneecap China's AI abilities in that way.
I think that's fine. I don't want to put you on the hook for representing the establishment too much, but
at the same time, I worry about over Taiwan and other wars quite a lot, like, and some other things that fall short of war, like, cyber attacks or, things. There's a lot of concrete things to worry about that are not an LLM being cheap.
Can I start way back at the very beginning?
Go ahead.
And we'll definitely get to the Chinese or the Taiwan issue. That's kind of where I came into it, because it's like chip ban. Wait, doesn't this make it like easier for them to justify an attack on Taiwan? But let's come back to that. Start at the very beginning, if you would. How do you, and maybe abstracting away a little bit from like current personalities, right? Because I think we've got, let's say, singular personalities at the top of both countries right now. But if we forget about like personalities and egos and ideologies, what would you say is like the natural strategic relationship between the United States, this giant landmass on one side of the world, and then like China, this giant landmass and obviously giant populations on like the opposite side of the world? Is there any reason for us to be rivals?
Well, there's a question of like, do I think we should be rivals in the ideal world? And do I think there are natural forces pushing us toward rivalry that are unfortunately there? The answer to the first question is no, we shouldn't. The United States and China were de facto allies for most of the 20th century, with the exception of a brief period in which they fought a war against each other. But then other than that, other than the Korean War, which was, it was stupid on both sides. That entailed big mistakes on both sides, but was rectified when Nixon and, Kissinger and these people, I'm not a Kissinger fan, but this was a good move, actually. We de facto allied with China against the Soviet Union, and China helped us win the Cold War, or we helped China win the Cold War. And we helped China economically integrate into the world. We helped China throw off Japan. We helped China avoid conquest by European powers in the early 20th century, which is not a thing a lot of people know, with the open door policy, where basically America sort of stretched the Monroe Doctrine, applied it to China, and said that like, no, none of you Europeans will try to conquer China. Don't do that. And so we've been, with the exception of the time that we fought a war, America and China for the 20th century were in close cooperation, if not actual alliance, which we were several times. And there's no reason we can't be, you know, I mean, like, that was good. That was fine. The 20th century went well, I think. You know, a lot of people died. But I think overall it sort of turned out well at the end. Like things went in a good direction overall with some bumps, in which a few tens of millions of people died. And, you know, Mao was really terrible. You know, he was sort of a bump in the America-China relationship. So that's, you know, culturally, I think that America and China are very similar to each other. If you look at how Chinese people live and how they think about the world, it's not very different from America, or at least not from what America classically has been. You know, American culture has changed a lot recently due to social media and things. But then I think that classic American culture of like, I'm going to get rich, but I don't know how, you know, or being obsessed with real estate, or like driving to the mall, or, I don't know, liking hip hop, but also being slightly racist. Like all these, I could go on and on about the ways in which Chinese culture and American culture are fundamentally similar to each other. And they're both like large countries. You know, China's bigger than us, but we're both pretty big. And we're bigger than the surrounding countries. And these create natural similarities between us and China. Now, I think there's a popular myth that countries and civilizations that are similar to each other do not fight, have less of a reason to fight because they're similar. Well, no. As my little sister likes to put it, bitches fight for niches. And the fact that, you know, we and China are so similar means that in some ways we occupy the same niche, both in our own minds. You know, I'm the big country, I should be in charge, you know, and then like CCTV versus Fox News, I guess, you know, and then, but also in the world, you know, like, and so I think even China's economy looks a lot like our economy did 100 years ago. This, you know, massive manufacturing, overcapacity, sort of fast follower and everything, like, you know, innovative, but on a small scale rather than a basic research scale. Like that was us. That was early 20th century America. I mean, we had some big inventions like the airplane, obviously, but, you know, in cars, for example, we were a fast follower. In machinery, we were a fast follower, et cetera, of Britain, Germany, and France. Those were the guys inventing this stuff, and we followed them. Anyway, China's following a similar pattern to us. And, you know, we dipped our toes in the waters of imperialism with the Philippines, and the Spanish-American War, you know, and China looks like they may do that in Taiwan with trying to grab some territory from India, throwing their weight around. Big, rich country, you know, guess who's rich now? We're going to throw our weight around. Can't boss us around anymore. Foreign powers. Like that was us. And I think that our similarity naturally pushes us toward rivalry. That doesn't mean we have to fight a World War III, but I think that this is a thing we have to deal with. And, you know, it's easy to say that we should just be nice, back down, and not, you know, just not do it. But that's, you know, all your life you grew up in a world where America was the dominant power and could basically choose international relations. We could have chosen not to do the Iraq War. If we wanted, we could have chosen not to do the war on terror. We could have chosen all these things. China gets a vote. And if you watch, I think, do you know Sarah Payne? Have you watched Dwarkesh's podcast with Sarah Payne? They're just really excellent, and I recommend watching that. She's like, we can talk about our approach to China should be all day long, but at the end of the day, China has an approach to us, and we have very limited ability to control that. And us being, you know, nice to China and trying to do everything we can to facilitate their power and economic strength and blah, blah, is a thing that we did for decades upon decades. We did that. That's a thing we already did. And there's a general consensus now that was a failure. I think that China turned around and bit us, you know, bit the hand that fed them in some way. I think that consensus is a little overstated. I think that you did see some real liberalization in China during the Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao years of the 90s and the 2000s. You saw, you know, you went from like Mao, like having your personality cult and slaughtering everybody, to like Mao impersonators being normalized during the Hu Jintao era. And you had years of peace and prosperity. So I don't think that was and Chinese people deserve to not be poor, and they're not poor anymore. I mean, there's still some poverty in China, obviously, but like overall, they're not a poor country anymore at all. They're a developed country. And I'm not going to say that's bad. I don't think that was the consensus now in America is that was bad. We shouldn't have done that. We should have, you know, avoided that, let them stay poor, shut them out of the international trading system and blah, blah, blah. I don't think so. I don't think we should have done that. I think it's better for a billion people to not be poor. At the end of the day, poverty is the ultimate enemy of the human race. We've got to conquer it. Then we can solve all our other problems then. But absolute poverty, the kind where you don't have enough to eat, people not having enough to eat in the world is the ultimate enemy of humans. And I wrote an essay about this called The Elemental Foe, which I recommend. My own thing. And so in that sense, however, I think that China's leadership has transitioned. China's system for selecting leaders is bad. Deng Xiaoping made a huge mistake when he crushed the Tiananmen Square protests instead of accommodating them, which is that he cemented a leadership system that selects leaders via essentially backroom power dealings. What that means is that eventually you will get a leader who is extremely good at backroom power dealings to the detriment of other things. And that's what you've gotten with Xi Jinping. You got that actually pretty fast. This is not popularly known, but Deng Xiaoping handpicked Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao to be the next two leaders of China. After that, he said, you all are on your own, because I can't pick forever. And so as soon as they got on their own, there was a big political knife fight, and a guy named Xi Jinping, who was extremely good at getting his cronies in everywhere and dominating the CCP, he knifed Bo Xilai and Zhang Youkang, and I'm mispronouncing his name. But he was this great political infighter who basically dominated China. And he is not the most hawkish guy in China, but he's pretty hawkish. And he definitely sees America as a foe, as an enemy, despite engagement, despite our decade-long policy of engagement. So it was China who defected from that cooperation first when Xi Jinping came to power in the early 2010s. Before that, we had a cooperative relationship with China under Hu Jintao. We had differences over Taiwan. They were an authoritarian government, blah, 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 blah. We had our differences, but we had this fundamentally cooperative relationship still. And Xi Jinping decided to change this. He decided. We didn't make that decision. We have to get out of the mentality of thinking that America makes all the choices, that we have all the power, that we have all the agency, that we're the big one who makes all the choices. We're not the big one anymore. They're bigger than us in most of the important ways. We're big. We're still big, but they're bigger than us in most important ways. And they made the choice. Xi Jinping made the choice that America is our rival. We've got to topple the American-led global order as he saw it. And Rush Doshi is a very good analyst of this. One of the most preternaturally calm human beings you'll ever see. He has attention surplus disorder, and he went through. He's extremely good at Chinese. That's an understatement. He went through decades of Xi Jinping's communiques and speeches and stuff like that. Summarized them in a book called The Long Game, in which he basically summarized. It's one of the driest books you'll ever read. It's very hard to get through. But if you think that's hard to get through, try getting through reams and oceans of Chinese Communist Party documents. And he basically said, okay, look, Xi Jinping has a paradigm. There's a paradigm shift in Chinese thinking under Xi Jinping, which is not entirely caused by Xi Jinping himself. There are more hawkish people than him somewhere in the Chinese government. But Xi Jinping is the guy who cemented this into a new idea, and created Chinese Communist Party slogans for this, which they love those slogans, right? And his slogan is "Great changes unseen in a century," which means basically, the current global order is an American imperium, and this will be overthrown by China. China will overthrow that imperium and replace America. And that's how Xi Jinping thinks. That's not how Noah Smith thinks. That's not how people should think. But it's how Xi Jinping thinks. And it's pretty clear that he thinks that. And China gets a vote. We don't get to decide unilaterally the relationship between us and China. We just don't. And I think that people who think that we do get to unilaterally decide that are coping. They're clutching for the feeling of control, this illusion of control that they always felt like they had before. In the 90s, the U.S. China relationship was entirely determined by the U.S. In the 2000s, it was, 85% determined by the U.S. Now it's like less than half. China they're leading the dance. They are in the driver's seat. That's a fundamental fact that I think we have to acknowledge. And Xi Jinping's huge attitude shift toward the United States predates our attitude shift, predates Trump, predates Biden, predates like back in 2013, the only person saying that China was our like rival was Chuck Schumer, this old dude who nobody was listening to. And that consensus shifted very quick. And it shifted, and Xi Jinping was the first to shift it. He was the first. So economic decoupling between the United States and China has been proceeding since the beginning of the Xi Jinping era. He has tried to, that's what Made in China 2025 is about. It's about decoupling. It's about removing all Chinese dependence on U.S. inputs, economic, chips and machinery, whatnot, airplanes, everything, making China totally economically self-sufficient. That was something he did before the United States did export controls or tariffs or any of this stuff, right? The narrative that the United States just woke up one day and decided to like kneecap China and keep them down is bullshit. It's wrong. Xi Jinping woke up one day and decided that China's going to overthrow the US-led global order and stuff like that. We're basically reacting to that. Now, I say basically because Trump watched a lot of, CNN back in the 90s and decided that like America is losing the industrial race against Japan. And then he sort of transferred that anxiety, which was mostly misplaced at the time. He transferred that onto China mentally. And he's like, how come we have this big trade deficit with them? We've got to fix it. And so some of it, Trump had some agency here and some of this was going on there. It wasn't entirely Xi Jinping, but it was mostly him who shifted this relationship. And I think we have to just respond to that. We are in a position we're not used to being in. We're used to being the big one, the one who acts and everyone else reacts. Now we're reacting. We're not the big one anymore. And I think that's a mentality, that's a mindset we've got to get used to.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Great news! Your sales team just landed a major new enterprise client. Bad news, service can't start until you've completed their 20-page security questionnaire. If this sounds familiar and you're tired of wasting senior engineering time on this problem, you should check out SafeBase. SafeBase is the leading enterprise-ready trust center platform, and it allows you to offer your customers centralized, secure, self-service access to the answers they need when reviewing your company's security and trust policies. With SafeBase, you can streamline workflows and questionnaire responses with a powerful AI automation, eliminate friction in the review process with robust integrations into Slack, Salesforce, Teams, and more, showcase security's impact on deal acceleration and compare your team's performance to your peers with rich analytic dashboards, and grant the right people the right access at the right time with customizable settings that are ready to scale with the most complex use cases. Plus, you'll get white glove customer service from onboarding to optimizing to ensure that your team sees value in as little as 16 days post-launch. Trust is your competitive advantage, but it rests on a combination of speed and tangible proof. See why leading companies, including OpenAI, choose SafeBase to take a proactive stance and prove their commitment to security for their customers. Learn more at safebase.io/podcast.
Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, AI is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. If it's not in your industry yet, it's coming, and fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, plus all of your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for compute and 80% less for networking, so you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson Reuters, and Suno AI. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies for this special offer at oracle.com/cognitive. That's oracle.com/cognitive.
So what do you think is the threat in like concrete terms, right? Because the word like overthrow,
What could actually happen? What's the bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, they want like to be part of some international reserve currency bundle, or they want like, what do they want?
Not important. So they actually don't want to be the reserve currency, and they should. China should have have one of the reserve currencies at this point. The RMB should be one of the dominant reserve currencies on the planet. They don't want it. What China wants is, number one, control of the seas. Trade goes over the ocean in physical goods. Trade goes over the internet cables in digital goods. China wants to control, and internet cables are maybe like Starlink or whatever. China wants to control those things. They would like to control the lanes of global trade. And you see this in the South China Sea, where they've basically said, this is our maritime territory. This is, your ships may not pass here until we say so. And that's an area through which much of the world's trade flows. That's different. The U.S.-led global order entailed freedom of the seas. We said, here's the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Anyone can send their ships through these waters. It's international waters. We have rules about you own the waters next to your coast, and then the international waters are free. And the United States Navy, overwhelmingly the most powerful Navy until recently, was the policeman of the seas. We made sure that there was freedom of the seas and that global trade could go. And also the internet. So much of the internet was United States controlled, and we enforced freedom of the internet. We said, you can send your data over these cables. We built these cables. You can send your data over these cables. Go for it. And of course, China built the Great Firewall, but still the international internet cables through which digital trade happens, all services trade, etc., those were free because the United States said so. And the freedom of the seas happened because the United States said so. And that created the trading regime that ironically led to big American trade deficits that Trump dislikes. But that created the trading regime that allowed the world to enjoy an unprecedented period of growth, but that also tied China to the United States in important ways and made us mutually interdependent. And that was why we did it. That's why we did that. We believed that if we bound the world together in the mutual interdependence of commerce, that would prevent conflicts and wars. After World War II, our priority was preventing conflicts and wars. China would like to have sovereign control over extended areas of the ocean, where the Chinese Navy decides which ships may pass and which may not. Much of the United States' economy depends on trade that passes through those waters. Much of the United States economy similarly depends upon digital trade that passes over the internet cables that China would also like to now control. And now they're going around cutting some internet cables. Anyway, that's a preview of what's to come, I think. But when you talk about the U.S.-led global order, I don't think you're talking about the reserve currency. I don't think you're talking about like the IMF or the World Bank or things like that. I think what you're talking about is trade. And you're talking about the lanes of trade, the sea and the internet. And those are the things that China would like to control, I think. Now, there's some other, I think, bad things that Xi Jinping would like to do to the United States, ways that he would like to hurt the United States in order to make us less of a potential threat to Chinese power in the world. One of those, obviously, is to cut us off from trade and from control of our own trade. That's one thing. A second thing is destabilization of our society. I think that the more we end up fighting over pronouns or AI safety or defund the police or whatever the fuck we're fighting about this week, the more our society becomes disunited and unable to oppose whatever China wants to do, Chinese power. Power is optionality. Power is option value, right? Power doesn't mean I do a thing. Power means I can do a thing if I want. That's what power means. It's option value. And China wants the option value of being able to do whatever it wants. And as long as the United States is a big, rich, powerful country, we get a vote. They get a vote, but we get a vote too with our power. So China would like to, when I say China would like to stuff, I don't mean that your average Chinese person on the street would like this, right? I mean Xi Jinping and his regime and his cronies who now dominate the CCP would like us to be weaker simply so that we don't get a vote in the future. And if you think that this is not realistic, we're a generally much nicer country than China, and yet we also did the same thing to all our rivals. We weakened Germany and Japan after World War II, and we weakened Russia after the Cold War so that they didn't get a vote. And China wants to do this to us, but more because they're a bit meaner than we are now. So China would like to destabilize our society. Whatever you get on the internet and argue about and have flame wars about, and whatever cultural thing you think is a threat to you, China would like you to have more of those flame wars. Xi Jinping would like you to have more of those flame wars. He would like you to feel more of that threat from your fellow Americans, from your neighbors. And so, because the more we fight each other, the less we have the option value to stop China from doing whatever it feels like doing today, tomorrow, whenever. So I think that China has made concerted attempts to destabilize our society, which I don't like because I like living in a stable society. I grew up in a more stable society than I live in now, and I kind of like that. And so I think that weakening us.
Can you be more concrete on that? Are we talking like thumb on this TikTok algorithm scale or what?
Yes. So TikTok algorithm scale is absolutely part of it. Influence operations are another part of it. But the biggest part of it is actually called sharp power, which is that the Chinese state, party state, if you will, if you like that term, the Chinese party state has basically gone around using economic leverage to force people to say and do various different things. It has used that so far pretty narrowly to protect its, perceived interests over Taiwan, other things, Xinjiang, promote its stuff. It's used its sharp power to, bash, to stop the NBA from standing with the Hong Kong protesters, all that stuff. But sharp power can also be used to favor actors that destabilize American society, partisan shouters and culture warriors, and to weaken actors that want to unite and who oppose anything China wants to do. So if there's someone in America who says, no, guys, we gotta unite to stop China from closing off freedom of the seas or whatever they want to do, taking Taiwan, taking part of Japan, taking part of India, all these things. We got to stop them, guys. We got to stop them from controlling our supply of critical minerals. We got to stop them from doing these other things. And anyone who speaks up, China can use sharp power and control of online algorithms to silence those people, to silence the people who would have us unite. So the voices that would divide us end up being the de facto, the only voices left. That's a threat.
So I hear that, and I'm still kind of like not super, it doesn't sound like my grandchildren are going to be speaking Chinese. I do hear like...
They're not, nor does China want them to.
Yeah, so it seems like the threat is sort of marginal.
No one wants you to speak Chinese because that would mean that you could pollute China's own thought ecosystem.
Yeah,
with your
I was wondering how long I was
idea.
going to be welcome on Red Note, where I
they don't want you
just
to speak
popped
Chinese,
in
man.
for a minute.
They don't want they want you to not matter, to be at the periphery of the world where you don't matter and you go fight your little battles over whatever parochial bullshit you fight over and you don't bother them and you don't have any power to stop them from doing anything that they want. That's what they want. They don't want you to speak Chinese. When I say they, I don't mean your average Chinese person. I mean Xi Jinping and his cronies. That's their image of power. Their image of power is that you become Argentina. To America, Argentina is not even on the map. They don't matter. Malay's fun. I like him. And Argentina occasionally provides us entertainment and occasionally provides us with some supplies of raw minerals, right? But they don't matter. They're a non-entity to us geopolitically. We don't have to think about, Argentina doesn't get a vote on anything, right? They want you to be Argentina to them. That's their power. To you, to the way you've grown up and the things you're used to, becoming Argentina is bad. If you lived in Argentina, it would be worse than where you live now. And that's a threat. That's a threat to you. Whether you choose to accept, believe, and resist that threat or not is up to you, but the threat exists.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
The Cognitive Revolution is brought to you by Shopify. I've known Shopify as the world's leading e-commerce platform for years. But it was only recently, when I started a project with my friends at Quickly, that I realized just how dominant Shopify really is. Quickly is an urgency marketing platform that's been running innovative, time-limited marketing activations for major brands for years. Now, we're working together to build an AI layer, which will use generative AI to scale their service to long-tail e-commerce businesses. And since Shopify has the largest market share, the most robust APIs, and the most thriving application ecosystem, we are building exclusively for the Shopify platform. So, if you're building an e-commerce business, upgrade to Shopify and you'll enjoy not only their market-leading checkout system, but also an increasingly robust library of cutting-edge AI apps like Quickly, many of which will be exclusive to Shopify on launch. Cognitive Revolution listeners can sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/cognitive where cognitive is all lowercase. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, so visit shopify.com/cognitive to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/cognitive. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. Bull market, bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Inflation's up or down. Can someone please invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backward and more time on what's next. As someone who's spent years trying to run a growing business with a mix of spreadsheets and startup point solutions, I can definitely say, don't do that. Your all-nighters should be saved for building, not for prepping financial packets for board meetings. So, whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. And speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/cognitive. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/cognitive. That's netsuite.com/cognitive.
I mean, you pick a country I happen to know better than most countries. When I think about Argentina, I feel like their problems are largely the result of mismanagement over many successive generations of leadership. And we may have a similar problem, but I don't think Argentina as a nation can point to somebody else and say, you did this to us. And I don't feel like if we end up, entering into some hyperinflation or whatever, we'll be able to point to China and say, you did this to us either. So I'm kind of like, okay, and that, there are other things that haven't been mentioned, right? They steal IP from American companies, and we could go down a reasonably long list of grievances one by one. But I kind of feel like, man, everything that we're accusing them of doing, or most things, like we're kind of doing, right? Like we're bullying Colombia and threatening them. You don't take some symbolic thing that doesn't matter, just like Daryl Morey standing up for Hong Kong protesters or whatever. We've got some, one plane full of dudes going to Colombia. We're going to threaten to sever the relationship over it until they back down. China's doing that to our private actors. We're doing it to other states. I feel like your point about the similarity is definitely, resonates with me. And if I bring this to the AI moment, I'm like, okay, they want to be more powerful. I would also say they are quite powerful, whether we want them to be or not. As you said, they have a vote. They're producing a lot of frontier AI research these days, right? So they are an advanced country that is capable of frontier advancing work. What are we trying to accomplish? It seems like right now, the sort of main point of escalation is the chip export control, and now increasingly AI arms race, or even as it's been recently put in to the paper by Alex from Scale, AI war. Going back a few years ago, my understanding of why we were trying to deny China these chips was that we thought they were going to militarize it and we wanted to keep them off the frontier. And now we fast forward to today and we're in the DeepSeek plus 8 days moment. And it seems like they're staying at the frontier, basically, of AI, or very close. So, it's not quite at the same level as the very best American companies, but it's better than any, but I would say the top 3 American companies. So DeepSeek is maybe number 4 in the world, maybe number 5, depending you could count, whatever else in there. Maybe count Meta, could maybe count Tesla X. But we're not keeping them from going to the frontier. It seems like they probably have enough chip capacity domestically to manufacture whatever drones they want to make.
And remember, I don't think that DeepSeek is a threatening thing. It doesn't seem that way. Maybe I haven't thought about it enough, and I'm just not thinking about this right. But I don't see that specifically as a threat. Remember, I do think there are threats here.
So what do you think we are trying to accomplish? what is the most coherent account of what the export controls are supposed to do?
So the purpose of export controls is to maintain a military technological edge over China. Because China, so first of all, let's talk about military balance. We have nuclear weapons and China has nuclear weapons. As long as no one figures out how to hack and cancel the nuclear weapons, which we always try to do, right? As long as no one figures out that, or detect the ballistic missile submarines, that's another way you could like potentially eliminate second strike capability. But barring that, if we maintain second strike capability and a whole lot of nuclear weapons, then neither country is under existential threat from the kind of like World War II style war. But what that also means is that in order to stop from losing a war, we would have to destroy the world. That's not a kind of that's the kind of escalation you will only do when the alternative is just you die anyway. Nuclear weapons are only a defense against existential, destruction. They are not a tool of crisis management. They're not. Vladimir Putin tries to use them that way, but it doesn't really work because they're not. You can't just say, let me have that little chunk of territory. I'll nuke the world. I'll destroy the world, man. No, you won't. You won't destroy the world over that little chunk of land. You won't destroy the world over this trade treaty. You won't destroy the world over this and that. You'll destroy the world if you're going to die anyway. But that's the only time in which you'll destroy the world. If you're even in the ballpark of a rational actor, you don't even have to be rational. But if you're even just have any ounce of self-preservation instinct, you won't destroy the world unless you're about to get killed anyway. So nuclear weapons do not create a balance of power by themselves. You need conventional weapons as well. John Mearsheimer actually wrote the whole thing about this, conventional deterrence. And he was right about this. This is back in the days when John Mearsheimer was right about things, before he got sort of old and kooky. Everyone gets old and kooky, and it's going to happen to you and me as well. Our conventional deterrence against China, in other words, if China wants to take over U.S. ally, we want to stop them from doing that. That's very weak because if China has this massive production capacity, they can produce a bazillion missiles, a bazillion drones, etc. In order to offset that, we can't completely offset that with technological advantages. We have to produce things ourselves and get our allies to produce more things. But we can partially offset it by maintaining a military technological advantage. Having, they have more stuff, we have better stuff. That helps us. It doesn't solve the whole problem, but it's one thing that helps. There's many aspects to the question of maintaining a military technological advantage. But one of them is precision weaponry. Have you heard of the third offset or whatever? Okay, so starting in the 80s, but then really accelerating after that, we got precision weapons. We got weapons that could find a target and hit the target instead of just throwing it into the general area of wherever the shit was. Precision missiles, precision drones, precision things, right? That's how you fight now. The purpose, the reason this is powerful has to do with actually inverse square laws and inverse cube laws of physics. As in, a shock wave dissipates according to an inverse cube law, and light radiant heat dissipates according to inverse square law. And that means that if you hit something accurately, you can just be much more effective. In fact, in terms of ground warfare, we realized that precision warfare was more effective than using tactical nuclear weapons in ground warfare, because tactical nuclear weapons were big, but the inverse square law and inverse cube law were so powerful that tactical nuclear weapons blast radius would dissipate. Precision weapons could actually give you more power than tactical nukes on the battlefield in terms of destroying enemy vehicles, destroying enemy command posts, and things like that. Precision weapons have become a cat and mouse game. Electronic jamming, hiding from things, GPS, sensors, computer vision, blah, blah, blah. America's had the best precision weapons for a long time. That's a military technological advantage that can partially cancel out greater production. So you see this on the battlefields of Ukraine. You see American precision weapons have been holding their own against Russian mass. Even though Russians fire 8 times as many artillery shells as the Ukrainians, the Ukrainians get more kills because they have American precision weapons. And there's been big fights over jamming. There's fights, like fights about how to hide stuff. When I say fights, I mean adaptations, military adaptations about how to do those things. And so we've seen that on the battlefields of Ukraine. It won't solve the entire problem of like underproduction, but it will partially solve it. It's an offset, right? It'll offset their power. And so in order to maintain that military technological advantage in precision weaponry, it helps to have better chips, because chips become your onboard computer. When you have a drone, using computer vision, looking for stuff. So suppose you have a drone controlled by a remote operator, right? The drone's controlled by a remote operator. It's using radio waves, okay, to talk to this guy. You've got this guy with a little joystick sending the drone. It's called an FPV drone, right? It's a toy. You can buy it anywhere, but GPS is not a toy. And so you can jam that, right? You can send out a radio wave. You can have this big radar thing that sends out a big radio wave signal to jam the drone's connection to the GPS, which means its connection to the operator, the human operator. Then the drone just goes, where am I, dude? I can't find the thing. Or even just falls right out of the sky. And so that's the game people are playing in Ukraine. The way you beat that is you cut off, you make the drone not need a signal, right? You have the drone have computer vision so it can look around. It says, oh, there's that tree. I see a Russian thing hiding under that tree. I'll get him. Just boom. And then he gets him, with no need to autonomous weapons. And now we're talking about the future of warfare as autonomous drone swarms. And for that, you need lots and lots of chips. And once drones start fighting other drones, it becomes an arms race of who has the better chips on your drones, right? And export controls are one way. They're not sufficient, obviously, but they're just one of a number of ways that we're trying to maintain our edge in that future fight, in that sort of fight that's coming. The fight may not come, but if we would deterministically definitely lose such a fight, that takes away our power, that takes away our optionality, that allows China to do whatever they want. Conquer Japan, conquer India. Maybe I'm not going to conquer India, but they could grab some of their territory and basically reduce them to the minor power. They probably could conquer Japan and conquer South Korea, all those things. It means that we can't stop them if they want to. Whether they then do that depends entirely. We lose our vote. And the chip export controls, which have been effective, by the way, chip export controls, they didn't stop China from developing LLMs, but they've stopped China from manufacturing the best chips. They really have. They've been very effective in that. How effective that is militarily, we don't actually know, because we're talking about weapons that haven't been created yet. Autonomous drone swarms exist in the research lab, but they don't exist on the battlefield yet. How effective those export controls will be at stopping autonomous drone swarms and making America's autonomous drone swarms better than China's is a question that I don't know the answer to, and I suspect that no one on the planet knows the answer to, although someone out there knows better than me and isn't saying, right? But the export controls have been working. The purpose of the export controls was not to prevent something like deep sea. I mean, maybe someone hoped that they would, but that was never the stated purpose. That was never, the purpose of the export controls was to stop China from being able to mass manufacture leading edge chips. It is not enough to maintain a military advantage over China. It is not sufficient.
But we're also not selling them chips, right? I mean, there's multiple levels of the export control. So
that's right. That's exactly right. But those, frankly, that part of the export controls are not going to work. That part of the export control, the part where we don't sell them the chips, will fail. But the part of the
So you think we can slow the development of China's domestic chip industry effectively, but we can't keep chips writ large out of their hands? That seems plausible to me as well.
Yes. In fact, had I been in charge of the export controls, no one thinks to make me in charge of these things because I'm a random blogger who sits around with his pet rabbit. But had they made me in charge, I wouldn't even have focused on chips. I would have kept selling them all possible chips. And I would have focused only on machinery, tools, software, and other things where we actually have a reasonable choke point. I don't know why they focused on the chips thing as well. I don't know why they added those. I don't think it's going to do us a huge amount of harm either. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I think what's going to happen is that your slightly off-frontier NVIDIA chips are going to be just as good as the frontier NVIDIA chips, and we're just going to keep selling those. I think it's cosmetic. I think that part of the export control is, for all intents and purposes, useless. Maybe it serves as a distraction. I don't know. But I think the equipment export controls are effective. They're already proving extremely effective. And also software export controls, personnel export controls. So the most effective part of export controls isn't even the machinery. It's that we said, if you're an American citizen, you can't work in the Chinese chip industry. We'll, fine you, put you in jail. I don't know, whatever. It's personnel. Talent is everything. Basically it's we put a stop to a lot of talent going over to China's side. Not a complete stop. Because remember, all these things are to some degree porous. You can't make a complete wall, right? And I don't know whether, in the last days of the Biden administration, they released these very complex export controls that, designate all these third countries, blah, 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 because they looked at who was trying to circumvent the export controls. And I don't know if that's going to fly. I don't know if that's going to actually work. I haven't, it seemed rushed and it seemed a little too overreachy. And the stuff we were doing before was probably working better than people realized.
It's like planned economy almost.
Yeah. And I think that's going to need to be reevaluated. But the export controls over machinery were effective. They were obviously effective. China tried to pull this stunt with making this 7 nanometer chip, which then they turned out not to be able to manufacture in any appreciable volume. And their costs were really high, and their reliability was low. The quality of those chips sucks ass. And really, they're just continuing to be dependent on TSMC. But anyway, that stuff works, and it will slow them down. It'll work to slow them down. So it's just one part of an overall strategy to maintain conventional deterrence over China for 10 years. After 10 years, the threat of war probably diminishes. It will not go away. But I think that the next 10 years are the peak risk. They are, as Hal Brands has put it, we're in the 1950s again in terms of the threat of war, where we were with the USSR, except now we're more on the position of the USSR, but because they're the ones with the manufacturing capacity now. But and we're the ones with the ideology. We proselytize. But our goal should be to freeze everything, deter China from launching a giant World War III for 10 years. And export controls are not sufficient to do that by any means, but they are one piece of how we do that. And then I think Xi Jinping's not going to last much longer after that. He'll be 80. By the end of that, his fourth term will be up. The bellicosity and the dream of overthrowing the U.S.-led order that he has will diminish after 10 years, just as the Soviet Union sort of expansionism and aggression diminished a lot upon the death of Stalin and never really came back even under Brezhnev. There was a little bit more aggression under Brezhnev. There were some, nuclear scares, blah, 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 but we were never in as much danger of fighting the Soviet Union as we were in the 1950s. That almost happened. World War III came very close. After the Cuban Missile Crisis actually was the peak of danger of nuclear launch, but in terms of conventional war, it wasn't even close to the peak. And so we need 10 years of deterrence. That's what we need. That will make the situation a lot better. And then we will work on repairing that relationship with China and having going back to being friends as we were. Remember that we had this 15-year rupture in our relations with China under Mao, right? 15 years, maybe 20 years. We had this rupture in our relations with China under Mao that we repaired. We patched it up, and we'll patch it up again someday. We'll be friends with China again someday. But unilateral dropping of deterrence, unilateral weakening of all our deterrence methods is not the way to patch that up more quickly. Establishing deterrence, and establishing stability is the quickest path to repairing our relations with China.
Okay, let me ask a couple. We don't have too much more time, so I want to spend the remaining time on this next few years critical period. And I agree it's a critical period for AI reasons, if not for plenty of other reasons. I know you've analyzed demographics and whatnot previously too. But it seems like to me, we are on a pretty risky path where we've got Taiwan, obviously the object of their desire is where the chips are made. It seems to me that cutting them off from the chips made in Taiwan lowers the barrier to attacking Taiwan, right? If they're not getting the best stuff that's made there, then it makes it just that much easier to attack. In fact, you'd even say maybe that is a reason to attack. We're getting the stuff from there. They're not, right? So, geez, we've now got both sides kind of announcing multi-$100 billion build-out plans. And I think most concerningly to me, we've gotten multiple Western AI leaders. And here I'm thinking, again, Alex from Scale, but also Dario from Anthropic, who literally said that our plan should be to build a giant global alliance, apparently under Trump's second term, box out the autocracies, by which he primarily seems to be
Just
referring to
China.
China. And
Russia's a
then,
gas station. You know,
and then
Iran is a
eventually,
basket case. It's just China.
yeah, it's China. So eventually, then we'll make them an offer they can't refuse. He doesn't use exactly those words, but that's basically how I read the essay. We're going to come around and say, okay, we've cut you off. We've advanced our technology. We have overwhelming AI superiority. Here's the terms on which you get to be part of the AI-enabled world order. That seems kind of crazy to me. I don't know if you think it's crazy, but
I actually don't know.
it does seem like it increases their incentive to like do something crazy sooner rather than later.
You might be right and you might be wrong. I'm not well placed to evaluate this because I don't understand the technology well enough here. Again, I don't see DeepSeek as a big threat to America, but I could be wrong because I could just not be understanding how these things work enough. So I guess my answer is I don't know. Let me talk to those guys and see what they're thinking, read their stuff, think a little more about this, and then I'll get back to you, because I've had a lot of time to think about precision weaponry and the effect of export controls on things like drones and missiles, and to watch Ukraine war unfold, and to think about conventional deterrence with respect to Taiwan and the whole thing I just gave you. What you just talked about with the whole AI supremacy thing, it's funny because my friend Grace wanted to have this big discussion with me about that. And I was like, Grace, I don't have, my blog is called No Opinion for a reason, which is I have plenty of opinions, but the set of things upon which I do not have opinions is vastly larger than the set of things upon which I do have opinions. And I don't actually have a strong opinion on this one way or another. I don't know if what these guys are talking about makes any sense. I would like to talk to Alex Wang. I can't talk to Dario. He came on our podcast before. We can talk to him about this. In fact, Eric, we should probably just get him back to talk about this. And maybe y'all could even debate. I don't know. I will ask him about this next time I see him. But I don't know, man. That it sounds hokey to me, like the idea that we could maintain this AI supremacy in the LLM field. It sounds unrealistic. And I think DeepSeek probably shows that it's unrealistic. LLMs are a borderless, commoditized, universal thing. And all the AI that I was thinking of was, in terms of chip stuff, was autonomous onboard compute for autonomous drone swarms and precision weaponry, which is a very different kind of AI, right? That's not even the same kind of model, computer vision. That's a convolutional neural net, stuff like that, right? It's, maybe if you used an LLM to say, hey, robot, go kill the Russians. Find a Russian, kill him. Maybe you could do that. But that's sort of that's icing on the cake, right? Slightly better control interfaces. I know, Lockheed Groom? He's very into using LLMs for voice controlled robots. Maybe that's useful, but I don't know. I don't know how are LLMs going to fight wars? Are we going to say hey, Claude, tell me how to kick the ass of the Chinese? Actually, it's funny because it's not very well written, so I need to rewrite it. It's also very dated. But when I was a college kid, I wrote this silly short story about an AI war between the U.S. and China, between AGIs, U.S. and Chinese AGIs. But the U.S. and Chinese AGIs, both after having achieved sentience, both decided that it would be better to not fight and to be stoner kids and basically just watch old movies and get stoned and whatever, just chill. And then they the human minders, the humans whose job was to make the AGIs fight each other, the AGIs basically traded them romantic advice in exchange for collaboration. And so in exchange for advice on their romantic relationships, the human minders would overlook the fact that the US and Chinese AGIs had become friends and were not fighting each other. And that was after the spy plane incident. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but there was the spy plane that got it got shot down. It's was it a spy plane? It was like a radar plane. I don't remember what kind of plane it was because I didn't understand things in those days. But they were a brief ratcheting up of U.S. China tensions, and I was just thinking about this thing, So I don't have any idea how LLMs will figure into the military balance. I don't understand their military applications. I don't know if anyone does. It seems to me, just looking at how things are going, that trying to maintain supremacy in LLMs at the company level, much less the country level, is probably not going to work. But again, I'm not an expert. I'm just footballing here.
Yeah, the model starts to get very AGI or even ASI, super intelligence, and then it's I think the path goes like, well, we'll have this like super intelligence, and then it will figure out how to make the best drones, and then we'll have like, and it'll figure out, how to hack their electrical grid better than, and meanwhile harden ours, and then we'll have like all, have them kind of cornered on all these fronts. But the time window in which that is supposed to happen is like very short.
Yeah, maybe. I can't tell you, I can't sit here and say, well, that's bullshit. That's obviously wrong. If I said that, I would be overstepping my knowledge. I can't tell you that they're wrong about that, but I also can't tell you they're right about that, or like, oh, sounds legit. Like, I don't even know if that sounds legit.
It doesn't sound impossible to me, just given the trajectory that we do seem to be on, but the time delta between when we have those things and when everybody else has those things does seem like it could be fairly short.
Eric, what do you think? You've been so silent this whole time. What do you think about this? Help me out here. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I wish I wish I could. These are beyond my pay grade to some degree, but I think it's a good call for us to bring on some more experts in the space, as you were saying before.
Yeah, at a minimum, this has been, good foundation, and I think more time should be spent in just the American discourse, just getting clear on like what are our complaints, like what is the threat from China. It's not nothing, but that part of the conversation is so often just jumped over into like, are the chip controls working or not? And I feel like we've so often skipped like, what were we trying to do? And, has that morphed in the time that the policy has been in effect? And now we're sort of, I think there's a lot of post hoc justification going on, and also a lot of confusion because, DeepSeek has definitely burst onto the scene and confused a lot of people. And I'm with you. It's hard to look at something that's an open source that it looks more like a peace offering to me than it does like a threat.
Nathan, to that point on peace offering, have you sort of read Xi's speeches when he's like, very direct about sort of the goals for what China, like in terms of, are you familiar with their own rhetoric about how they conceive the United States? And do you take them kind of literally, in that? And no, I know it's 45, so feel free to go whenever you want, and we'll just continue.
I got like 5 minutes. Cool.
I've read very little. So, I wouldn't even pass myself off as a hobbyist in this domain. Certainly far, far from expert. But since you asked, I did just happen to read one because I've been asking everybody, like, what am I missing, that should make me afraid of China to the point where I want to do all these things, which I think probably won't work except to keep beneficial AI out of the hands of the Chinese public. That seems like the biggest effect that I can see we're likely to have. So anyway, somebody sent me a speech.
That won't happen.
Well, I hope not. I think they all deserve.
There's
nice
no way that'll
too.
happen. That's impossible.
I hope
you can't do that. The only person who could do that is Xi Jinping, and he won't do that. Well, maybe a little bit, but he mostly won't.
In any event, my verdict on the
Chinese public will have all the AI they can AI.
Well, then I guess I still am like, I don't know what we're hoping to accomplish other than we just seem to be escalating. But I read one speech which was chosen, to try to persuade me, and it felt like, I don't know, it seemed like a very mirror image sort of speech. Like it was mostly domestically focused. It included specific, explicit claim from Xi, which you could say, well, he's lying or whatever. But he said, we are not seeking to export our models to the rest of the world. We want to like resist and overcome containment, which was the translated word, I think, for what we're, what they perceive us to be doing to them. But it didn't seem like particularly warmongery or, hateful or anything, super. When it was sent to me, I expected it to be a lot more, scary sounding than it ultimately was when I read it in translation.
Well, the guys who were scary sounding were so around 2020, starting in 2019, but really 2020, Xi Jinping put all these guys called the Wolf Warrior diplomats. It's named after some silly action movie. The Wolf Warrior diplomats he put in charge of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And all these guys went around and said a bunch of very bellicose things. You are falling, we are rising, we will bury you, blah, 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 blah. They sounded like Kaiser Wilhelm in like 1913, right? They sounded, you can read what these people said. Just Google Wolf Warriors, read what these people said. It was incredibly aggressive. Xi Jinping himself is not that aggressive, but if I would urge you to read the book, The Long Game by Rush Doshi, it is not an alarmist book. It is one of the driest books you'll ever read. However, it is relentless. It is well argued. And Rush Doshi understands Chinese strategic thinking better than you or I will by the time of our deaths. He already understands better. So I would urge you to read The Long Game. And if you want to see examples of actual Chinese bellicosity, certainly read, Google Wolf Warriors and read some of the things that they said a few years ago. But in addition to that, I would urge you to look at some of the actual actions, in not just words, but actions that China's been doing. The hacks of critical infrastructure that have been happening daily. Not just privacy invasions like listening in on your phone calls over your cell phone or reading your text messages, but also just penetrating critical infrastructure. I would urge you to look at some of the things China's been doing with cutting internet cables around the world. That's a real action. Cutting internet cables is a real thing that you can do. The actions are bellicose in addition to the words. China's actually doing things that are aggressive. Look at their, territorial acquisitions in the Philippines. Some of the stuff they've done toward India and the border with India, like slowly taking territory. There's a lot of, sort of aggression out there happening. That's not just actions, that's actual words. Will that blossom into like conquerors of the world? Well, maybe not. Our job is to stop it, to minimize the probability that happens. Because in World War I, it sort of did. But then in World War II, it also sort of did. And so World War I taught us that you shouldn't go to war. You should hold your fire. Don't be an idiot. World War II taught us the opposite. World War II taught us that holding your fire is appeasement. That, when you've got an enemy that relentlessly wants to take over more and more and more and will never stop, you don't appease them. That just makes it harder to fight them later on. Which is the right lesson with regards to modern China? I don't know. And it may be some mix of the two. Or some third thing. The Cold War taught us that deterrence works. Yes, there were fights in Vietnam and Korea, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, we didn't nuke the world. We didn't have a big conventional war against the Soviet Union. We didn't pull out the tanks and the helicopters and all the things for the big one. It didn't happen. And all through that time, the world got more and more peaceful and stable. Not uniformly monotonically so, but the Cold War was a success. Despite all the dumb mistakes we made and the horrible things that happened, the Cold War was a success. And it was a bigger success than World War II. Because World War II, we also beat the bad guys, if you want to, we won, but at the same time, a lot of people died, like 55 million people died. That sucked. However, with the Cold War, where we learned from World War II, we didn't appease, we deterred, we contained, but most of all, we deterred the Soviet Union from military adventurism. And after Stalin died, after that pivotal decade, the danger went way down. That's a success that I think we can learn from. I think the Cold War, not World War II or World War I, the Cold War, despite the lack of an ideological component to it, I think that we're not ideologically at war with China, but the Cold War is still the best model for our interaction with China. And deterrence is still the best option because ultimately that's the way our relations improve in the future, is to stabilize the world. Only in a stable world can we and China become friends again, as we traditionally were. That's my thesis. And I do have to go, but that's my final thought.
Yeah, that's a scary one because I expect pretty choppy waters ahead for multiple reasons. But yeah, for now.
No, thanks for joining. Until
next time, folks.
It is both energizing and enlightening to hear why people listen and learn what they value about the show. So please don't hesitate to reach out via email at tcr@turpentine.co, or you can DM me on the social media platform of your choice.